Marina and Alexander had been together for 4 years as husband and wife. Their story took a sudden turn when Alexander, swept up in emotion, popped the question barely a year into dating. Back then, Marina was only 23, spirited, spontaneous, and often driven by impulse. During one heated argument, she blurted out that she was leaving him. Alexander, older and more seasoned, knew not to take her words at face value. Still, the thought of losing her rattled him to his core. That fear, raw and immediate, pushed him to ask her to marry him. Looking back, Alexander never once regretted that decision. His feelings for Marina hadn't wavered. In fact, they only deepened. So, when she came home one day, fed up with her job and ready to walk away from it, he was all in. "You've never liked it there," he said reassuringly. "Honestly, it's probable for the best. Something better will come along, I know it." But Marina had a different idea. "I don't want to jump into anything just yet," she said with a sigh. "I need some space to breathe, to figure out what I really want." The next 6 months drifted by. Marina spent most of her time either lounging at home or out with friends, soul-searching and chasing a spark that seemed just out of reach. But as the weeks piled up, so did the tension between them. The energy in the apartment changed. It got heavier, quieter, more strained. That final month felt like everything was unraveling. Alexander chalked it up to Marina hitting some kind of emotional crossroads. She started pulling away, not just from work or friends, but from him too. She seemed adrift, stuck in a fog, unsure of what she was looking for or where she belonged. Alexander, holding on to faith, kept telling himself it was just a rough patch, that she'd bounce back eventually. But little by little, even he began to feel numb. Coming home no longer felt like a relief, it felt like a burden. Truth be told, his sadness ran far deeper than he let on. Alexander had quietly arrived at a point in life where he was ready, truly ready, to start a family, to fill the silence of their home with laughter and little footsteps. But every time he looked at Marina, her distant gaze, her listless movements, he knew deep down it wasn't the right moment. She was clearly grappling with something, and bringing a child into that kind of uncertainty didn't feel right. It was during this emotional limbo that Eugene, one of his co-workers, started sliding into the picture more and more. On the surface, Eugene was just a casual work friend, someone you grabbed a coffee with, shared a few laughs at lunch. They weren't particularly close outside of the office, but when you spend 40+ hours a week with someone, lines blur. They start to feel like part of the backdrop of your life. Lately, though, Eugene had gotten a little too comfortable. He began asking Alexander for the occasional favor, covering for him when he ducked out early, making excuses to their boss, always with a sly grin and a vague mention of personal stuff he had to handle. Alexander would sigh, roll his eyes maybe, but go along with it. Part of him figured, hey, someone should have something good going on outside of work, right? But what began as a once or twice a week thing slowly snowballed. Before long, Eugene's little favors became daily demands. And they weren't just harmless anymore. He started pushing his luck, asking Alexander to take over parts of his workload under the pretense of being swamped. Alexander didn't love the idea, not one bit. Still, his laid-back nature got the better of him, and with a tired nod, he'd agree. Again, Eugene in turn strutted off with that smug satisfaction, like he'd just pulled off another small victory. Then came that sweltering summer afternoon. The office was practically deserted, and Alexander had been alone for nearly 90 minutes, trying to push through the heat and the growing haze in his mind. Eventually, his focus slipped, and he reached for his phone, aimlessly swiping through old photos. And there they were, snapshots of sun-drenched vacations by the sea. Marina's laugh, frozen in time. her eyes sparkling with something he hadn't seen in months. His chest tightened. They looked so alive back then, so full of hope. For a moment, on the way, he swung by a local shop. He picked out a bouquet of her favorite flowers and grabbed that party cake they always used to share for no reason at all, just because. His heart felt a little lighter as he drove, imagining her smile when she saw the surprise. But as he turned onto their street, his stomach dropped. His usual parking spot had been taken, not just by anyone, but by a car he instantly recognized. Eugene's. Alexander froze for a second, staring at the license plate, his pulse pounding in his ears. Eugene never came to this side of town. At least, he'd never mentioned it. And yet, here he was, improving his personal life, no doubt. Alexander pulled into the next available spot near a different building entrance and got out, gripping the flowers a little too tightly. His mind was racing, but his legs moved on instinct. He'd never climbed those stairs so fast. When he pushed open the door, he was met with silence. An unnatural quiet hung in the air, the kind that made your skin crawl. Something was off, terribly off. He stepped into the apartment slowly, his heartbeat thudding in his chest like a warning drum. The bedroom door was cracked open, just slightly, enough to let a sliver of light slip through. Somewhere deep down, he already knew what he was about to find, and yet he kept moving forward, because sometimes the truth, no matter how painful, demands to be seen. With one final breath, he pushed the door open, and there it was, his worst nightmare come to life. Marina and Eugene, tangled together on the bed, oblivious to the world outside that moment. For a second, time froze. Then everything inside Alexander exploded. Rage surged through him like fire. Before he even realized what he was doing, he lunged at Eugene, fists clenched. The blow landed hard. Eugene went down without. Alexander turned toward Marina, eyes wild, pain etched into every corner of his face. But her voice, shaken, pleading, cut through the storm. Please, stop. Just like that, he snapped back into himself. The weight of what he'd seen, of what they'd done, settled over him like wet cement. This wasn't a fight. It was an ending. And so it ended. The divorce followed swiftly, cold and final. In the aftermath, Alexander wrestled with more than just heartbreak. What twisted the knife deeper was the grim truth. Eugene hadn't been lying about his personal life. He and Marina had been building a new one together behind his back. They moved in, got married, just like that. His friend had taken everything from him. Alexander seethed with fury, but never retaliated. He carried his pain in silence, choosing dignity over vengeance, even as the betrayal gnawed at him. Eventually, though, he reached a breaking point, at least professionally. He sat down with his boss and laid it all out. Eugene's constant early exits, the shady behavior, the mounting violations. Alexander hated the feeling of snitching, but he knew Eugene had earned every bit of fallout that was coming. And sure enough, it came. After the divorce, Marina seemed to flourish. She moved into a fresh, modern apartment, basked in a sense of freedom, and reveled in the affection of a man who, at least in the beginning, seemed to adore her. With Eugene's encouragement, she stopped worrying about work. She rested. She leaned into the romance. And for a short while, she felt lighter, like maybe she'd finally found what she was missing. But bliss has a shelf life, and hers expired the moment Eugene got fired. Everything changed. No longer the charming, ambitious man she'd risked everything for. Eugene floundered. He became moody, withdrawn, unmotivated. He started pressuring Marina to pick up the slack. "You should get a job," he told her one morning, barely looking up from his phone. Caught off guard, she scrambled to find work, eager to help, to fix things. But Eugene? he showed no such urgency. His excuse? He needed time, a mental break from the grind. Weeks passed, then months, and it became painfully clear. He was milking her kindness, and she was falling for it. The truth hit hard. Marina had leapt from one life to another without ever pausing to understand the man she'd chosen. She thought Eugene would be her upgrade, her escape from monotony. But reality? Reality was a whole different story, and it kept getting worse. Without the structure of a job or a routine, Eugene started drinking. What used to be the occasional beer after work turned into all-day binges. The absence of responsibility gave his demons room to grow. One night, Marina came home from work and walked into a scene straight out of a nightmare. Eugene, bleary-eyed, sitting at the kitchen table, surrounded by empty bottles and a handful of strangers who looked just as lost. It was the moment everything unraveled. She stood there, frozen, wondering how the hell she'd ended up here. She didn't want to live with a man who was spiraling, but the thought of facing another divorce, 2 in a single year, made her stomach turn. The shame, the gossip, the second round of failure, it all loomed too large. So she stayed. Day after day, she clung to a crumbling relationship, weighed down by regret. And in the quiet moments, when the house was dark and Eugene was passed out on the couch, she'd think about the life she'd thrown away, the man she once had, the love she'd traded. And all she could do was whisper to herself, was this really worth it?